One of the things I wanted to do this morning as we're getting started is to take a moment or two to talk about the corporate sponsorship for the President's climate commitment and for this conference. There's a lot of material in your the wonderful paper bags, recyclable paper bags that you received at the beginning of the program. I would encourage you to really take a look at that. The corporate partners that we have who are here today, and I don't know that all are here this morning. We'll have some special time to recognize them at noon today as well. Has anyone got a control of the gain on this? Maybe you could turn it down just a little bit. Maybe down just, there we go. Is that better? Is the echo going away some? Great. But the foundation partners which make our work possible, the John Merck Fund, the Kresge Foundation, the Wege Foundation, the corporate sponsors, Sodexo, for whom we have to thank for a wonderful meal last night. It almost competed in quality with the cafeteria at College of the Atlantic. In fact, I would hate to have that competition. Johnson Controls, Organica Water, Siemens, the Energy Systems Group, Honeywell, Lockheed Martin, Train, Waste Management, Xerox, and then a long list of silver sponsors, including the American Meteorological Society, Book Drives, Carbon Nation, Chevron Energy, Con Ed Solutions, Greener U, Mac Gray Campus Solutions, Mohawk, Pepco, ProFlowers, Snyder Electric, Webster Industries, and a special relationship with with all of these partners, which is based in part on generosity of contributions, Karen, to what the PCC is trying to do. And it enables us to engage a number of institutions at a lower cost than we otherwise would be able to. And that is critical as we look at the need for full range of diversity among institutions in the President's climate commitment. But more than that, each of these partners is really much more than someone just looking for business. As several pointed out yesterday, yes, they're looking for business, and yes, they want to make a profit. College presidents can easily understand that approach. We are not unaccustomed to following our tin cups around the world. But it's really more than that, because there is a substantive relationship between what these corporations are doing and between the skills and the capacities that they bring to the table, which will enable us to do more of what we are trying to do with the President's climate commitment, and which bring us capacities on each of our campuses that we would be unlikely to be able to afford if we had to provide those internally to our own institutions. As I say, we'll have another opportunity to say thank you to the corporate sponsors and the foundation sponsors at lunch today. But if you would just join me for a moment in thanking them for their support, but more importantly for their commitment to the goal of climate neutrality and their participation in this program. We often get mired in discussing the challenges of climate change. And as great as the challenges are, the opportunities are even greater. And one of the core values of sustainability has to be an optimism, a belief that indeed we can do better, we can choose a different future, and that in that choosing there are tremendous opportunities for civilization, for human rights. It is a very far-reaching endeavor that we're into, and our speaker this morning is an individual who is particularly suited for finding some of those opportunities. Paul Anastas is a courageous young man. I can say that as I approach 70. And to illustrate that, he wrote a book with his wife that I think you started before you got married. On greening the white wedding. I'm not sure I would have had the courage to take on such an endeavor at such a stressful time with my wife, but it is an example of seeing a challenge and turning it into an opportunity with some foresight. When we're really good as institutions of higher education, we can create an environment in which our students and our faculty can look at something that people have been looking at for 1,000 years and see something different, see something new for the first time, and once that threshold is crossed, nobody can go back, because that vision that the best among us are able to bring to the study of human relationships, to the study of the world around us, becomes viral the moment it is expressed. And that's particularly the case with green chemistry. Paul coined the term green chemistry. I don't know if you like being called the father of green chemistry, a parent. We're college presidents, we got to be gender correct, it could have been otherwise, and may well be in your case, I don't know about that. But in 1991, Paul had a tremendous insight, or was able to express a tremendous insight, probably born over many years of experience, that in fact the design of nature and the things we're working with are benign by design, if I can borrow the title from your book. And it is precisely that kind of observation which leads us into a future. We're already, we know, because of climate change, committed to a future that will demand the best that science can provide, that will demand discoveries and insights that we haven't had yet. The institutions represented in this room will be the crucible in which those insights are formed, and I can't think of anyone better to inspire us in that direction than Paul Anastas. Paul, please.
Good morning. Maybe this will work. Does that work well with the recording in the back? Awesome. How are we this morning? So I was looking for advice from Dave about, how to talk, because I am so excited about this topic. And I said, this is great. I could go on and on and on about this topic. And he said, yeah, you could. He said, you might want to remember Socrates. So I said, Socrates, yes. Well, what do I remember about Socrates? He said, well, he could wax on philosophically, brilliant rhetoric for hours and days, and they killed him. So I'll be brief. But I do want to talk about something that is, I think, essential this week. About a mile away from here downtown, there's a collection of people from 30 countries around the world gathered around the topic of green chemistry, green engineering, people who are in fact devoting themselves to designing tomorrow, the products and the process of our society, so that they can be different from how they are today. And what I'd like to do this morning is touch a little bit on this by taking a very direct look at how we do things currently, and then how they can be done, and some of the steps that we can take in order to make things different for tomorrow than they are today. Some of the realizations that we need to come to is that all we have on this planet is energy and matter. That everything that we see, touch, and feel is a material, and all of the materials that we use to generate, store, and transport our energy are things that can be and are now being designed so that they can be sustainable, so that they can be non-depleting. So if anybody has, and I'm sure no one in this room does, any hesitation as to whether or not we're on an unsustainable trajectory currently, it'd be worth flipping quickly through just a few images. That's my favorite. So what do these have in common? I think we're looking at the exponential curves. I think if anybody has any doubts, we just need to recognize that these exponential curves, these so-called hockey stick curves, don't just cut across our climate issues, but across all aspects of our current being, and we're living in a dynamic world. And designing for a dynamic world is different from designing for a static world. Now, Chris Jordan is a person that captures images that will give us a sliver of our current state of our current state of our society and our civilization in just very compelling way. So, does anybody want to tell me what this image is? Is it a impressionistic painting? Anybody? Oh. Yeah, that would be plastic bags, actually, every 5 seconds in the U.S. alone. This wonderful painting. Hold it. Is that really the painting? Well, let's zoom in. Yeah, those are the aluminum cans every 30 seconds. Sandy Beach, anyone? Wait, let's see. All I can tell you is that those are the 426,000 cell phones disposed every single day, and 5 of those are mine, because I lose them on a regular basis. It's terrible. All right, moonscape? No, those are, of course, are the 2 million plastic bottles every 5 minutes. Okay. So everyone in this room recognizes that if everyone in the world lived at the same state of development as the US or Europe or Japan, we would need somewhere between 3 and 4 Earth equivalents to supply the resources that are necessary. We all know the footprint measurements that are out there, and we all know that we're not going to get another 2 or 3 Earths to supply those resources. Now, who's played the carnival game Whack-A-Mole? Good. Exactly. And most of us do, sadly. And so often when we're talking about these great challenges that we're facing, we'll talk about water challenges, toxics challenges, our climate challenges, our biodiversity challenges, or energy challenges. When intellectually we all recognize that climate is inextricably linked to energy, energy to water, water to agriculture, agriculture to health, and on, and yet as we approach our issues, too often we pick these isolated quantifiable goals because often they are quantifiable. Choosing our goals because they're quantifiable has it a little bit backwards. We don't say things are important because they're easy to measure. Some of the most difficult things of life are the most difficult things to measure, yet they're the most important. Freedom, justice, equity, wellness. We don't say we're going to measure things simply because they can be reduced to a number. And too often, when we think in these fragmented ways, we accomplish the dubious distinction of doing the right things wrong. What do I mean by that? Everyone wants renewable fuels. Everybody wants biofuels, but when we achieve it, and ways that compete with food, feed, and land use options, we've accomplished the right thing in the wrong way in an unsustainable way. Everybody wants to capture the power of the sun. When we do it with scarce, toxic, depleting metals, we've done the right thing, but we've done it in an unsustainable way. The green agricultural revolution saved millions of lives by feeding hungry people when we do it in ways that use persistent bioaccumulative and toxic substances, again, doing the right things wrong. And there's a bit of absurdity that we need to step back and recognize and call it out for what it is. When we're looking at the products of our daily lives, whether it's in our baby bibs, our toothpaste, our clothing, our cash receipts, or on and on and on. Right now, we need to recognize that we are swimming in a material world. Materials are the basis of our society and our economy, the way that we generate our energy that is fundamentally detrimental to people, prosperity, and the planet. And recognizing that for what it is important. Because when we confront the fact that our man-made substances too often play a role in determining the gender of our children rather than it being determined by genetics, determining the IQ and developmental ability before they leave the womb, whether or not they are going to be prescribed to suffer from obesity or infertility, man-made substances making the decision as to whether or not we will be able to enjoy grandchildren. We need to recognize that as a historical absurdity. 70% of the smallmouth bass in the Mississippi River changing gender. Florida panthers, who 90% of which are unable to reproduce. A Pacific vortex of trapped plastic trash, the size of the state of Texas, that won't have a chance of degrading in the lifetimes of the person that threw it away, their children or their grandchildren. We need to recognize this for what it is. I think this picture speaks for itself. Since arriving at the EPA, I've spent a tremendous amount of time on energy-related issues. We need to recognize the inherent nature of how we generate our energy and what the difference between intrinsic aspects of our energy versus the circumstances by which we generate and use our energy. This is not the first time in history we've had a historically absurd situation. We've dealt with absurdities before. Certainly wasn't so long ago that women weren't deemed worthy of having the right to vote. This is one of my favorites. Maybe that isn't the best thing for a headache, perhaps. Maybe not. Smoke too and call me in the morning. There you go. Yes, bloodletting was the way that George Washington died after being treated for a cough, and leeches were common. Yes, once the earth was flat and once the sun revolved around the earth. I bring this up because we look at these historical absurdities and marvel that they are so misguided, so fundamentally and factually flawed, that we are astounded by our ability to even imagine that we, as a society, once viewed them as true. What our challenge is how do we ensure that our children, grandchildren, look back on the absurdities of today that we discussed in the same way? How do we ensure that that is banished to the ash heap of history as it should be. So, systems thinking for sustainability, thinking in terms of the interconnectivity, thinking about fundamental design, the inherent nature of our products and processes. Now, my boss, as usual, says things best, far better than I. And this quote is when she spoke to the National Academy of Sciences not so long ago. Sustainability is about understanding that environmental challenges do not obey bright lines or numeric limits. They are not constrained by disciplinary boundaries or the boxed walls of an organizational chart. Sustainability is the difference between treating disease and pursuing wellness. Looking at how we think differently and define our challenges differently, rather than making things a little bit less bad, a little bit less contaminated, a little bit less toxic, and setting a floor so that you can define how polluting you can be and still remain in legal compliance is a different challenge from how do you pursue the wellness of humans and the ecosystems that preserve us. So we all know the interconnectivity of these cycles. We all know that we cannot think about them in isolated ways, no matter whether, perhaps I'm thinking many of us, if not all of us, were trained in traditional, single discipline, reductionist approaches. What I'm suggesting is that reductionism, fragmented thinking, is what causes the unintended consequences of doing the right things and doing them wrong, doing them unsustainably. Reductionism, a miracle of science that has given us the understanding of modern life, needs to be complemented, not replaced, complemented with integrative systems thinking. Because my favorite New Yorker cartoon, I'm sure glad the hole isn't on our end. And one of the things that everybody in this room knows is that we're all in the same boat. We've only got one boat. And so, what those 1,000 people that I talked about earlier that are a few miles away thinking about in terms of molecular design and engineering and reinventing everything from our agricultural systems to our plastics and materials, our textiles, our computers, transportation, communications, pharmaceuticals, and on and on. It's about how do we think differently about putting our products together. Few examples. Today, the way that we compose our plastics, whether it's PVC piping, whatever the material that we're talking about, our adhesives and plastics are often start with very reactive starting materials, these chemicals that are so reactive, yet in part, because of their reactivity, tremendous toxicity. They put in more reactive toxic substances to make the manufacturing process go faster. We add all kinds of additives to add color, stability, flexibility. Every one of these contributing to concerns for toxicity, et cetera. And yet, that's not the way the mussel does it. Has anybody been down by the shore, reached in, tried to pull a mussel, a clam, a shellfish off a rock? Anybody raise your hands? All right. Is it easy? No, it's not. This adhesive, this material is made at room temperature with locally available starting materials, all of them benign, no high temperatures and pressures, and yet it's doing it underwater just to show off. This is something that is a miracle that we can learn from, and people are looking at biomimicry and biomimetic processes in order to think about how we design for superior performance. And I want to emphasize that. Superior performance from what we can create while being fully sustainable. Now, it was about a year and a half ago, I I had some free time on my hands and was redoing a bathroom. I don't know how many folks have redone a bathroom, but you have to scrape up the tile, and usually you scrape your knuckles, and it's horrible, and you're cursing to yourself, and then all of a sudden I'm breathing in the fumes, and right before I pass out, I read the label on the can, and it says use in well-ventilated area, and because if you don't use it in a well-ventilated area, it's bad, right? Okay. This is not the way nature does things. That's a gecko. Slide's not upside down. It is, of course, walking on the ceiling. Now, question I'd like to ask is, what chemical adhesive does the gecko slather on its feet right before it walks on the ceiling? Anybody? Yeah, of course it doesn't do it that way. What we're looking at is millions of submicron keratin fibers using weak force interactions in order to adhere to the ceiling. Now, does the gecko need to get out that little knife and scrape its foot off in order to walk? No. This reversibility, this ability to not only adhere every bit as strongly as you ever need, but in order to make it reversible many, many times over, infinitely, that is a lesson that we need to learn. Performance beyond what we have traditionally been able to accomplish, and I want to emphasize that, traditionally far better performance than what we've been able to accomplish, yet fundamentally sustainably. Now, how do we learn these lessons? Is the lesson we're learning is, well, let's hunt up all those geckos, take their feet, and make some adhesive? No, I'm sorry. From the EPA, and the official policy of the EPA is leave the geckos alone. But what has happened is people have learned the lessons of 3.4 billion years of design brilliance and translated it into gecko tape. This sculpture of Spider-Man is 1.5 meters long and has a square centimeter of so-called gecko tape. Learning the lessons of how you construct these new types of adhesives so that you can put him on and off the ceiling over and over again. So it's learning from the brilliance, learning from the design protocols that are there. The Abalone Shell. Looking at this Abalone Shell, we recognize that it's twice as hard as most of our high-tech ceramics, and behaves like a metal under stress, meaning that under pressure, rather than being completely brittle, it has some flexibility to it under stress, a little bit of flexibility. Now, how do we look at this? Because this is the Abalone ceramics factory. Again, it is not using high temperatures, not using high pressures, not using depleting rare earth metals. Again, doing it underwater with locally available, dilute, non-reactive, benign starting materials. This is how we make our high-tech ceramics. It's often referred to as heat, beat, and treat. So you take the materials, you put them into an oven around 3,000 degrees for 50 hours. I have a question for the audience. How many people in this audience have bones? Okay, most do. Okay. I don't know about you, but my bones are pretty hard. Those are pretty hard. How many people in the audience have been baked in an oven at 3,000 degrees for 50 hours? So what's my point? My point is we want the performance of hardness. We want the performance of the material. We can accomplish that performance without this approach. It's called molecular self-assembly, where you lay down protein templates and the materials align themselves, give you the hardness, give you the structure, give you the performance that you want without all of the unsustainable approaches that are traditionally necessary. This is the picture of the abalone. That's the one made by another ceramics company. You may notice that there's some gaps in there and say, well, I think the one on the right is far more orderly and I like it more, except for the fact it's those gaps. It's those interstitial gaps that allow that performance of behaving like a metal under stress, so it actually gives it higher performance. And we're learning that lesson too. So I just want to bring this home about what is it that it means for all of us. I happen to be on leave from Yale University, on public service leave while I'm serving in the administration, and there's wonderful discussions going on there, like at all of your institutions. And when we think about how does this realization of going about designing tomorrow and having our students and the broader work of our institutions play into designing tomorrow, what does it mean, what we have to do? Well, we all recognize that there are many roles that the Academy plays in society. If we want to boil it down to a number of key roles, everyone agree that the university has to exist, it has to operate, it has to function. No doubt a central unit is education, classically or broadly defined as you will, and many institutions engaged in research at some level of another. When it comes to sustainability, as it is in so many other ways, we are comfortable saying that we can introduce sustainability into our operations. And there have been wonderful examples. Some of the wonderful commitments around climate are just tremendous and remarkable and need to be applauded and celebrated for what you're all doing. We know that we can introduce courses and teach students about sustainability. We certainly know that many of our research institutions are conducting research on different aspects of sustainability. Now, there's a next level of thinking that people recognize that maybe we can make our operational efforts relate to an educational experience, linking an educational experience to some of the changes that we're making in operations. There's some thinking about how we connect our educational efforts in sustainability to our research efforts. That's something that folks are comfortable with. What folks generally aren't as comfortable with is seeing that all three of these things can interlink seamlessly. The same university that is teaching sustainability, let's say alternative energy, is teaching a course on alternative energy, is one that likely has research of some sort going on alternative energy, and is also a university that uses energy. You can do that same thought processes with water and many with even agriculture and other challenges. Having those things interlinked so that the living laboratory of the university is opening the eyes, opportunities, and actions of the students is tremendously important. And it's something that I think so many people in this room can translate from a concept into reality. We also know that it's not simply about the university, the college, the community college, but rather the greater role that you play with your community, linking as a network in the world. And so how to best mobilize your efforts in this area is such an essential piece. I do want to just highlight this because when you start thinking about we need to train students for what's coming next, preparing them for if we're going to be moving toward sustainable design. If we recognize that 62% of the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies have chief sustainability officers, how do we get them prepared for things like the green chemical industry to soar to $98 billion by the end of this decade? How do we prepare students for thinking in this way? Because one of the things that we all recognize as we reflect on most of our backgrounds being single discipline, most of our experiences being reductionist, most of our current structures whether it's in our departmental structures, whether it's in the structure of our academic journals, whether it's our reward and tenure systems. How do we structure the work of our institutions so that they actually foster and catalyze rather than retard this broader thinking that I think so many of you appreciate? We know that I have a little confession to make, that at the State of the Union address, I'll phrase it this way, the State of the Union address, I heard rumors that there were drinking games going on, and that people gambled on how many times certain words would be used. The person that chose innovation was used 11 times in the speech. I'll say won that bet. But focusing on the fact that sustainability is arguably inextricably linked to innovation, because one of the things that we know that while the image of the word, the usual definition of sustainability classically is to maintain and sustain, we know that when you're on an unsustainable trajectory, the only path towards sustainability, it requires dramatic change. And so that innovation is going to be absolutely crucial. And some of it is going to relate to science, technology, engineering, mathematics, both in terms of the background that will be necessary, but also the changes that will be necessary in integrating these classic disciplines into the broader integrative thinking. There are programs at the EPA, I just want to mention, that are so crucial, so essential during these very trying budgetary times. It is very easy to argue that things like innovation, forward thinking, integration, fellowships for students are not core to a regulatory agency's mission. I obviously think that they are absolutely critically essential, and so I am drawing your attention directly to these things within this current climate. One I'd like to just focus on is the last one, people, prosperity, and the planet. This embodies how you bring students together from very different disciplines across very different challenges. They come to the mall every year with projects that accomplish water, energy, equity goals all at the same time. This is a sustainable design competition that has shown, yes, the power of science and technology, but more importantly, also coupled it with economic growth, job creation. There have been patents and companies founded from these student projects dealing with equity issues. So it's a tremendous program that was founded a number of years ago by a close colleague of mine who I happened to marry, was referenced earlier, and who has been tremendously supported over the years by a personal hero of mine, Jim Beiser at ASU. So this is one that I just wanted to highlight. But I just wanted to close and say that there's a reason that on this 50th anniversary of JFK's speech calling for the moonshot and going to the moon and returning safely to Earth, and how he spoke about how this challenge unifies our best efforts, unifies our minds, brings us together in order to accomplish something bigger than any individual goal could, that it's a goal that we choose to accept, or unwilling to put off and intend to win. That on this 50th anniversary, we need to have that kind of focus. We need to have that kind of urgency. We need to have that kind of commitment. And the reason that I may remain the most optimistic person in any room is because when I put that first slide up about all we have in this world is energy and matter, I lied. What we also have is commitment, we have spirit, we have ethical imperatives, we have genius, brilliance, creativity, and together we can make things better for tomorrow than they are for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have an opportunity now for some questions, some discussion, some observation. I'll just let you handle them your own. If
Wonderful.
you see someone that you're suspicious of, don't call on them.
Very good.
It's in your hands and yours.
Thank you. Any thoughts? Look at that, and I tried to be provocative. My goodness. Sir.
Yeah, thank you for your remarks. You talked about the institutional arrangements at
Yes.
colleges and universities, and I was very impressed that you highlighted that. I'm interested in the fact that increasingly with university corporation partnership, you have some of the entrenched interests who have benefited from the reductionist approach becoming more active partners in the academic enterprise. And so how do you reconcile that with the kind of thinking you've described in the
Oh, I think that the challenge is not whether or not partnerships are going to solidify the old structure. It's whether or not we can make the compelling argument that the status quo is so unappealing, and the change that we want to make is so much more appealing. Whether it's talking with the private sector, I'm always a big believer in that you speak the language of the tribe that you're talking to, and so we recognize that appropriately business is in business to make money, and it's because the examples of sustainable design broadly, whether using, so I highlighted some of the green chemistry areas, but it can also be extended to engineering, systems design, all kinds of approaches, that these have been demonstrated really over the past decade or two to give you not only higher performance, but higher profitability. So showing that this is going to meet the interests, in that case with a private sector partner, with some of our academic colleagues, showing it that there are greater research challenges, great academic questions that need to be resolved, showing that our colleagues in environmental groups and NGOs, that this is simply a more effective way of accomplishing the goals that we're all trying to achieve. So I think that's the larger challenge is making that case clearly and concisely, and overcoming some of the mythology that's there, that including that sustainable technologies don't work as well and cost more. My favorite JFK quote is that the great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and realistic. And overcoming this mythology is one of the great challenges that we have. Sir.
Seems like you really have two levers. One is the education. More and more people realize that there's not only more sustainable alternatives, but they actually make sense. But then there's also regulation. And being from an EPA, how do you balance between the regulation and trying to encourage things by other incentivizing means?
Yeah. So the regulatory side of the house looks at setting that important floor that below which is unacceptable legally, socially, et cetera. What I think I was trying to focus on today is how do we create the race to the top through innovation. We'll always will be essential, indisposable set of standards beneath which we cannot sink. But creating that race to the top, creating that vision where being sustainable is a competitive advantage, being sustainable is a more effective way of achieving your goals. I think it's a different goal that probably requires different tools.
Time for one more question. Yep.
Sir.
Clearly, we have a consumption problem, right? And it's evident by all the different shots you showed of waste. But then the slide on salaries, and petroleum engineer, I was mystified. But how do we get a chemical engineer up and drop petroleum engineer down?
I'm not sure if I'm going to engage in that war. What I will say is that when I mention how we need to think the difference between circumstantial and intrinsic, when we start asking the question of historically, in many of our environmental challenges and the pursuit of the environmental challenges, we've said that we need to, reduce, eliminate, minimize, stop, ban. These have been some of the approaches: controlling waste, controlling emissions, stopping, reducing. Those are essential for that floor that we talked about. But what sustainable design is focused on is what can you create? What can you invent? What can you innovate that is fundamentally aligned with the natural systems and with the health of the planet? So whether it's starting with renewable materials, plentiful renewable materials that are benign, that are not going to persist in the environment, not going to bioaccumulate in our bodies, not going to survive as waste and landfills or in the Pacific Ocean. Looking across the life cycle design and aligning the inherent nature, not changing the circumstances, aligning the inherent nature of our products, processes, and systems, I think is something that is an experiment that has been run, shown that it can be done, and now simply needs to go to scale so that it's the default value. It's simply the way that we do things today.
Paul,
Thank you
very much.
Thanks.